the first speaker is Newton Harrison, who's sitting here.
Wow.
And
You know, I don't know what a social fiction is. It may not exist, and in fact, it may be a fiction itself. So I'm an artist, but I'm also an ecologist, and I'm comfortable in the sciences. Mostly I work with other people's work, science. Every once in a while it's not there, so Helen, my wife, and I, who are a team, do the science ourselves. So what we would hold for the artist community is that every artist should have to do a work of experimental science where they group where they do the repetitions and establish the preponderance of evidence behind the theory they have. Once the artist can do that, then he can speak, or she can speak, in the language of the sciences. It's hopeless to get the scientists to speak in our language. So I gave that up about 40 years ago. It's hopeless because what happens is there's a fixed notion about literality, and we work with metaphor. And so we work with, it's probably right, and if not, you'll learn something anyway. So in this later part of our working together for 45 years now, we came to the conclusion that there was something missing in all of our work. And this conclusion happened as a result of a long time ago, in 1969, I was walking in the woods up at UC San Diego, where I come from. I'm an emeritus professor from there. I'm walking in the woods with Richard Feynman. I'd done an artificial aurora for Expo 70, and there it was, and he thought that was baby talk science, which it was. It was simply plasma physics. So he began to ruminate on his equations, and he said, oh, is there something wrong? For a whole year, there's something wrong. Since I don't know what an equation is in the first place, I listen carefully. What he discovers, though, after the end of all this, is that no, that there's something wrong, that something was missing. That which was missing was something. And therefore, he came to that's how he worked his way finally to his sum over the history's equations. Later in our lives, now, we were contemplating a problem that we see, and that is, let's see how we can say this. Normal exploitation by human beings, by all of us, capitalism being the most intense, but socialism a step behind, we exploit systems for our benefit. And exploiting a system for our benefit, we don't bother to give anything back to it. Whereas if you take a look at nature, nature grows just like we try to grow our businesses. Nature grows, but it grows without charging a profit. It grows because it takes sun energy, and it takes free energy around it, that are the energies that are the waste from the systems around it. And that's how it grows. And energies that nature doesn't want, it stores, call it coal and oil and the like. It's not a good idea to take that which nature has stored and put it back into the system. And we can see that from the CO2 that's enveloping us. We think that we have redesigned or captured a term from the business community called the Force Majeure, okay? And we reframe it ecologically, or we reframe it from what's happening on the terrain. Like we have two great frontiers coming at us. A frontier of heat, touching all surfaces and affecting them, and a frontier of water touching all edges the ocean touches and rising. And those two frontiers are different from any other frontiers we've ever had, because always in our past we have moved toward a frontier of some sort and exploited it. And it's a little bit hard to exploit a potential 40,000-year heat wave. That suggests that these great forces are at work, and that poses the question, are there counter forces available? I mean, the force majeure at work is much more than just these two things. It's the continual outpouring of industrial waste in the air, in the waters underground, and in the topsoil. So we began to wonder about exchange. And so we did a little poem. It's called Reflecting on the Laws of Conservation of Energy and Exploitation of Ecosystems. Our physicist buddies say it's baby talk, but for us artists, it was kind of neat. Matter energy can be transformed from one form to another. Matter energy can neither be created or destroyed. When matter energy is transformed from one form into another, there's a net loss of available energy in the place that it's been transferred from. This loss is called entropy. A local system that has been transformed and lost energy moves toward higher entropy in that locale. A system that maintains its ability to tap energy, although not in equilibrium, tends to be a healthy, local, low-energy ecosystem. Now, if a forest in a watershed is clear-cut, all the energies in the wood are transformed and dispersed. The energies within the topsoil, the energies embedded in earth-dependent habitats, supporting a multiplicity of lives as a consequence of erosion, are dispersed. The entropy of the watershed has been increased by the dispersal of those energies. The energies so dispersed can't be retrieved. What then, watershed? What then? Now, that's the story of what happens to all usable systems. So that suggests that, in this sense, the entropy of the planet, of all systems in the planet are rising, or some people use the term disorder, others dislike it. But however you want to frame the argument, we're in bad trouble. And so the question then is, what might one do about it? Well, I'm going to tell you a story about the Dalai Lama. In '92, we get a call from his medical advisor who liked our work. He said the Dalai Lama is making a peace park, and would you help with it up in Tibet? So who says no to the Dalai Lama? So we said yes, and we began our usual investigation. And what do we find? We find that the plateau is not in such trouble. The rivers coming from it are, particularly along the Himalayas, because so much foresting, so many trees have been cut. And so the rivers are endangered. So we did a work for the endangered rivers rather than locating a peace park up in Tibet, which the Dalai Lama then stopped talking to us, and reasonably so. So over the years, we'll take a problem like Tibet and keep on gnawing on it. And so I'm going to show you, the first work we'll show you is called Tibet is the High Ground. The images next. Okay, stop. The images you're seeing are the, taken off of Google, high def, are I guess it's Google Pro, are the beginnings, the headwaters of the seven, some call them sacred, others call them just great rivers, that nourish lots of India and nourish lots of other places as well. Next. And so you can see that this is pretty strange terrain to an American eye, but it's the source of the health of a continent. Next. So, then stop there. Then what happens is we call our map makers. We have map makers in Toulouse who make maps for peculiar folk like us, and we ask them to make the Tibetan plateau first clear and white, but maybe 6 feet across, so you could actually get a sense of its relationship to the rest of the continent and the world itself. Next. I think we should go back, and I'll read that text. Can we go back? Right there. Go for it. Up. Can it be that in this 100-year moment or less, both our collective history and destiny are being spelled out by glacial melt as temperatures rise 10 degrees Fahrenheit in the high grounds? For instance, by mapping the Tibetan Plateau as most of the field in an azimuthal projection map and intensifying the rivers, it's not difficult to see that these 7 rivers flowing from the plateau nourish much of the continental Asia. And it's not difficult to see that the people in these 7 drain basins, totaling 2,648,000 square miles, with a population of about a 1.5 billion, including complex agriculture and farming systems, are at great collective risk. For this force majeure is at work with accelerated global warming, working in collaboration with accelerated industrial processes co-entangled over the past 100 years, beginning to experience exponential growth. The result for Asia, as well as the high grounds elsewhere, is that whole ecosystems are becoming erratic, yet as the force majeure becomes stronger, no counterforce remains visible. Well, so then we said, make us a new map of Tibet with the plateau looking a little bit like a bruise. So this is the map that came back. These things are 8 feet tall. When you put them on a wall, and they're 2 inches from the floor, and you walk up to it, they're made to touch, by the way, and you walk up to it, it feels like a little like you're walking into the plateau itself, so that works of art like these have a haptic or are set about to have a physical presence in the room. They're not a page in a book. So let's keep on going. So we pose the question. We pose the question to ourselves in the following way: temperature is going to rise. Flood and drought's going to happen from, everybody knows this by now, I suppose, from the intermittent flow of waters, since you don't have the slow flow from ice melt and snow. And so there's going to be a lot of death, what will live there. However, the rains may be as much or even greater. And so what would one do? How would one cope with such a thing? So we make a suggestion. Suggestion runs a little like this. There are 2.4 million square kilometers on the plateau. About 400,000 are mountainous in such a way that you couldn't grow anything on them. But the plateau itself is a weaving earth form. And if one were to do paleobotanical research, one would find what lived there when it was 10 degrees warmer. If one were to go down to lower altitudes a bit and find places that were 10 degrees warmer, one would also find species that might migrate upward to there. But the question we have here is, can you accelerate the process? Because we have to meet an accelerated warming and an accelerated change. According to folks we know, this acceleration is greater than anything that has happened historically. It's more rapid and more difficult for more species to cope with. So the question we ask ourselves is, can you invent a species palette and test it out so that as an ecosystem like that is fading back, a new one can move in? That is to say, you assist the migration of species through time as well as from place. Next. Next. Keep going. Whoops, we don't see it. Damn it. Okay, let's stay there for a minute. We got an Annenberg grant And we have a team up there run by an amazing botanist, ecologist named Tang Ya, working in the Sichuan University. We've selected a site up there, and we will begin to grow 3 samples of species. One adapted to dryness and 10-degree temperature, one adapted to the existing rainfall, and one adapted to greater rainfall. And we're going to, if it turns out that we're able to invent this appropriately, then we will have set the conditions for, without any exotics, by the way, for the regeneration of such a place. If one were to do this, and it worked out right, like a grassland well managed in a temperate climate will sequester about a little less than 1 ton of carbon per year, okay? So if you do a calculation on 2 million square kilometers, and we're right about the ecology, then not only does the biodiversity benefit, not only does the harvesting of a species benefit, but also such an area would sequester maybe 3 gigatons of carbon a decade. A gigaton of carbon drops our carbon globally 1 point. So we have to be, if we're raising our CO2 content so much, so quick, where do we drop it? Right now, there's mysticism in some of the sciences. There's a mystical belief. And it is that a stunning piece of original technology will come forth from human effort, and it will save us. Are you kidding? I mean, go back to Einstein. He says those who create the problem of this kind of scale hardly are able to solve it. My own feeling in the matter is that we kind of need inspired generalists rather than specialists, or working in tandem with specialists. So that's how and where we are with Tibet. We go up there in another couple months and begin work. Unfortunately, I didn't have the slide of the site. Originally, we had intended to invent what we call a future garden. That is to like invent an array of species that are the beginnings of a succession ecosystem that would follow a glacier uphill, since it takes so many thousand years for nature to recover. The question in these works is, can you speed things up without violating systems? Can you speed things up in the way nature would or could, or would if it could? Sometimes we're accused as artists of trying to be bioengineers, but we're neither engineers nor biologists. Around 15 years ago, they were having a Hanover World's Fair. And this World's Fair in Europe was about the ecology and about the environment. And all of a sudden, the bankers take over. And they give, and then space becomes some hundreds of euro a square meter. McDonald's is given the green food emporium and so on. By this time, the originators of the fair are in a state of rage. So they've been marginalized, but they get enough money to commission 10 books about Europe. And we get commissioned to do one of them. And so the first thing we have to do, the reason we're commissioned to do one of them is we had worked on many watersheds in Europe and had worked at the Bauhaus in Dessau after the wall came down, and done a lot of work in Berlin. And so we knew the terrain fairly well. But we didn't know what Europe was. And so we said, okay, we'll do your book on Europe and then do a show on Europe if we can figure out what it is. Next. I hope so. Next. Stop. Yes. we get a map of Europe that goes up to the Urals. And we knock out all the roads, knock them back, intensify all the rivers, and intensify the forests, and take a look at what we're seeing. And what we see is the peninsula being a shape surrounded by water, even as it is attached to the Russian plain. You see the Vistula River drops off the Carpathians, and the Dniester River drops off the Carpathians into the Black Sea, the Vistula into the Baltic. And this whole peninsula is attached to the Russian plain by only 30 kilometers. Later we find out that that was once a plate, but that's not what we were looking for. But what we did find was that we began to think about we finally got a definition of Europe. Europe's a peninsula surrounded mostly by water. And then we asked ourselves, what can you learn from this? Well, one of the things that was obvious was that geophysical transformations tended to lead, as the weather changed and resources were different, to slightly different ecosystems or slightly different plant ensembles, watershed by watershed. And then when you looked at who settled, that peninsula had more different languages and sub-languages than any other place. And so we began to wonder if we were looking at a rough and ready formula which said geophysical diversity is a basis for biodiversity. Biodiversity is a basis for cultural diversity. So we're not sure about this, but we think some serious investigation needs to be done here. And I think cultural diversity should not stay with our injustice to each other. You know what I mean? And we should go back and find out how we became. And that would require going back into the physical world. So, next. Okay, stop there. Well, now, we discover that this force majeure we're talking about is generating a drought from Portugal to damn near the middle of Germany. And so we do a work and ask the question, well, if the water's raised 3 meters, what's going to happen? And you notice that about 10% of the edge of the continent there you lose. About 20 or 30 million people have to move up. Our map makers in Toulouse took about 2-3 weeks to figure this out. So at the same time, this drought's moving across. And like, just to give you 2000 figures, 2001 figures, in the peninsula there were 420 million people heading on to 500. There on that peninsula are 3.3 million square kilometers of land. 2,300,000 square kilometers of this are farmland and were productive. 650,000 square kilometers of forest, mostly high ground, mostly monoculture, and about 350,000 square kilometers of grassland, about 25,000 square kilometers of urban land, and some trillions of cubic meters of rainfall per year. I forget, we had a rainfall map and calculated it. So that was before drought was figured into this. So it's useful to see and do calculations from big figures, because look what happens here. If that drought happens, and it is happening in Portugal right now, why then the 420 or 30 million have now become 450, maybe 475 million. So the population increases. You would lose about a third, or 800,000 or 900,000 square kilometers of productive cropland. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at an increase of population, a massive decrease in food supply, a decrease in land available, an increased mobility of people, and you're looking at civil breakdown. So is there some way to rethink this? So then, let's see if do we have another image? Let's go to the next image. Nope, we don't. Okay, go back. We discover we're on the Buckminster Fuller jury, and the people we liked best on it had made a water retention landscape in Portugal, so that you saw a picture of about 150 acres of hilly land and a couple road in the bottom, and very dry. And what they had done was not let any rain get off the land, and set up a percolation basin so that the waters that fall made a lake, and the lake percolated into the aquifer, and then they farmed outward from the center. You could look at this as a kind of terraforming, but then they were on terraformed land in the first place, since it had been farmed and it had been an orchard. So for about 1,000 years or so, Europe had been reshaped bit by farmers, removing swamps, flattening land, lowering hillocks, tipping land so that the waters would go off slightly, and not destroy roots and crops. So we made a proposal, and that is that the proposal said, let us retip and reshape 1 million square kilometers very slightly, with small machinery and by hand tools, the way the farmers originally did it, so that waters move toward low places or mini catchment basins, recharge aquifers, and then a new kind of farming might have to happen. One where the waters gathered, rich biota would happen, bird life and stuff like that, maybe fish farming. As you moved outward from where water was, you got to drier and drier crops. The argument for silviculture and wilding certain places is also profound. And where again would one find the species that would be happy here? Well, you could do what some of our botanists say, some of our ecologists say, let nature take its course. But the course we are forcing nature to take doesn't look like such a good course to me, and to many others. And so this is a proposal that's moving toward the EU now. It has a little problem. It looks like it's going to cost $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion, maybe more. It'll take about 30 years. When you weigh against civil disruption and pain, it doesn't look like so much. And it's certainly trivial in the face of a Bush war, or a Bush-Obama war now, where you're looking at over $2 trillion spent in 10 years, 12 years. Okay, we'll be generous, but you see what we have. This suggests that we really, really need to shift our values. This also suggests that we need a different kind of governance. Next, let's see what else we have here. One more. Keep going. Okay, stop. So how much time do I have?
5 minutes.
5? One last piece. That's the bays of San Francisco. If they have a 3-meter ocean rise, here's what happens next. You can see the waters move in there. Next. Gets bigger. Next. And that's what really happens. The Central Valley gets a big estuarial lagoon. Well, think now for a moment about energy, a little bit. That was once a very productive, semi-arid terrain. Then it became irrigated. Then it was farmed by the Japanese a lot, but not in vast amounts. Then that land was taken over. The rivers of the Sierra Nevada on the west side dammed and diverted. The energy's taken out of the forests, the rivers, the lands, the topsoil even, by so-called green farming, were profound. And now we're in trouble. As you know, those water farms are going out of business and stuff. And this might well be an opportunity. Estuarial lagoons are some of the most productive places in the world, especially more or less subtropical ones. If this became that, and we harvested and we again applied the assisted migration of species to it, and particularly did paleobotanical research where there once was a big ocean here, where there were waters here, we could end up with a new kind of farming where the harvest preserved the system. And you did not harvest from this place one crop. Every few years, something else would overproduce, and that was your crop that year. And that would keep the system stable, although far from equilibrium. And it might well have a higher quantum of energy in it than what once existed in its original state. So what am I saying? I'm saying that we've really got to apply massive creativity to what we're looking at here. The fantasy we had, and I'll end with it, is this. How would one drop the entropy while increasing the energy available in the world ocean? It's in trouble. Well, it's too complex a system and it's too big a system to just plain work with. So we had this fantasy. Supposing the world ocean could be understood as a finite number of biomes, okay? Biomes like a swamp or a contained system. Could be the prairie that has a boundary with the Rockies, but it could be big like that. Well, what if there's a finite number of biomes and a finite number of ecotones, that is, boundaries around? An ecotone is a boundary around that keeps biomes from eating each other up. Could one count that up, average them, and find a trend to the ocean that would tell you how to help it recover? Don't know, but seemed worthy thing to be doing. One last observation. It's our opinion that a metaphor like this is worth considering. Let's imagine the human race itself as a biome. Right now, this biome is an exotic since it can infect all others and take energy from them and not return it. Let's imagine then that a new government forms. And this new government is a world government, and its total job is to behave like an ecotone, a boundary condition. The work of such a boundary condition is to let the other biomes continue existing and to permit exchange to happen. Okay, thank you.